Come and sew with me the Florence Dress pattern. Now this pattern has a 3D bow, adjustable straps and a lace-up corset back. Let's get started. After you have assembled all of the pattern pieces together, the very first step is to cut out all of your pieces ready. And here I am just cutting out the skirt piece. My fabric is actually directional, so firstly I just need to make sure that all of my flowers are facing upwards. I'm just cutting out the bodice, and I'm going to be making sure that once I've cut out the bodice pieces, I go back and add all of my notches in. So these are going to be a really helpful guide when you come to sew the dress. They're going to make sure that even if you haven't got the paper on top of the pattern, you know which piece is which. And I also find it a lot easier if I lay out all the pattern pieces with the paper on top when I'm about to work. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is take the skirt. We're going to do the skirt first, and I'm going to overlock or edge finish all of the side seams. So if I have an overlocker, so that's what I've used here, but if you don't, I'm just showing you an example that you can use pinking shears, or you could even run a small zigzag stitch if you have that on your machine close to the edge. Once all of your side seams on your skirt are finished, I'm just going to take them to a flat surface and lay them right sides together. And I'm just indicating here with my finger that we need to sew the left side closed. That's because we need the left side open when they're turned inside out for the zip. So take that over to your machine and stitch with a 1.5cm seam allowance. This seam, and don't forget to back stitch at the start and finish. On the other side, we are going to stitch, but we're going to start from the bottom hem and we're going to stitch upwards, but I'm just showing you here, we're going to leave the top part open because that's where our zip's going to go. So I'd say leave a few centimetres down from where the notches are, where the zip's going to be. So if you want to measure roughly, I'd say 10 centimetres. So stitch upwards, but leave at least 10 centimetres at the top. You're going to go back and close that one once you've done the zip. So I'm just showing here that that should be left open. This next step is for option A, and if you have an overlocker. So I'm going to hem the skirt now. So keeping all of my seam allowance open, I'm going to overlock the edge, and then I'm going to take it back to the machine and turn it up a centimetre and stitch all the way around. When you're hemming, I also really recommend keeping your seam allowance open. It's going to help you later when you're adding the skirt to the dress. Then take it back to the iron and give it a really good press, keeping that seam allowance pressed open. Okay, I've just cut out a little bit of scrap because I'm just showing you, if you don't have an overlocker, that you can finish it by doing a double turned up hem. So I'm just going to press it upwards by about 0.5 centimetre. And obviously if you had the real skirt, you were doing that all the way around. Then I'm going to turn up this by another 0.5 centimetre. And again, go around with the iron and give that a really good press because it makes it so much easier when you take it back over to the machine. And when you are hemming with the machine, try and keep the foot lined up with the edge. That way you get a really even hem all the way around. And I'm just showing you here what it would look like if that was the method you decided to choose. Now this is how to finish the skirt if you're doing option B, which is the option with the frill. So first up, with all of those 4 pieces for the frill, you're going to finish the side seams. Again with the overlock or the pinking shears. Then go back and stitch all of the sides together, and you're going to form a big circle. Again, checking if you've got a directional pattern like me. I want all my flowers facing up, so I'm going to make sure they're all facing up when I'm sewing them. Then at the very bottom, you're going to hem this. If you have an overlocker, you're going to do the method that I showed you before. If you don't have an overlocker, you can do the double rolled hem. Now here, in each panel, we're going to do 2 rows of stitching close together from the top. And with these stitching, they're going to be used to create the gathers. So they need to be with a longer stitch length, so maybe 4 or 5. And at the start, you're going to back stitch, and then when you get to the end, you're going to leave that open. And I like to do 1 panel at a time. You can actually do the whole thing, but it's going to be really difficult to get the gathers even around the dress. So if you can see here, I'm just doing 1 panel at a time, back stitching to start with, then leaving the threads open. But I'm going to do 2 rows because that means the gathers will come out a lot more even. Now I need to find the midpoint of the front and back skirt. And in this example, I have already done the rest of the dress because I was going to do the frill last. But after I made it, I thought it'd be easier to explain on the tutorial to do the frill just after you do the rest of the skirt. So ignore the fact that the zip and everything else is in, because it'd be the same if you was just doing the skirt. So fold it in half and place a pin at the front and back midpoint. You've got the sides because the sides are indicated by the seams. You just want 4 equal spaces all the way around because there is where you're going to pin the side seams of your frill. Now you can gather the frill to match the length of the hem. So try and do this as evenly as possible and make sure you pin as you go all the way round, keeping that right sides together. You should have all of your corners of your frills in those 4 points that we pinned earlier. Then as I'm actually sewing it, I'm going to use my fingers just to distribute the gathers. There might be some that maybe are a little bit thicker than others. I really want to try and get them as even as possible. So if you use your fingers, you can usually feel which ones are coming out a little bit thicker, and you can lay them flat. Then after that, this is an optional step, you don't have to do this, but that seam allowance that we just have from the skirt, I'm going to push it upwards towards the bodice, and I'm going to stitch very close to the seam on the right side of the fabric. So just pushing that seam allowance up towards the dress, that's going to give it a much cleaner finish. But again, that's optional. Now I've decided which ribbon I'm going to use. So this example, I'm using ribbon to make the loops. And I need to cut them all 7 centimetres long. So we're going to cut 12 of these 7 centimetres long. And use a heat source such as either a lighter or a candle just to melt the ends to stop them fraying from when they're inside the dress. Now we're going to take the front main piece of the back mid bodice, so the ones where there's lots of notches to indicate where the loops are going to go, and we're going to start making the loops with the ribbon that we've just cut. So to do this, we're going to make sure that the ribbon is pointing inwards, and we're going to use the notches as a guide of where to position each loop. You want to create like an arrow shape, so don't twist the ribbon as you're sewing. Really take your time, it can be a little bit fiddly doing this. Make sure that the loops are all pointing inwards, and you also don't need to use the full 1.5 centimetre seam allowance here because we're just tacking them here. So afterwards I'm just going to go back and I'm going to back stitch over each one just to make it really secure for when we're wearing it on the dress. If you wanted all of your lacing at the back to be in a matching fabric, then you're going to cut out the loops on a bias. The piece is called loops when you're cutting the pattern out. And you're going to stitch that very close to the edge and then use a loop turner to turn those inside out. You're going to cut them exactly the same length, 7 centimetres, and stitch them in exactly the same way that we just did before. Now it's time to start sewing the bodice. So I've taken here, this is the main front fabric, and this is the centre front bodice and the mid front bodice. And I'm just going to pin them together, right sides together. When you're pinning around the curve, around the bust area, it can be a little bit difficult to get the notches matched up because it's a curve shape. So I'm just showing you here that they do meet, but when you're pinning it, it might not seem that way. So pin all the way down to the bottom, but then once you actually get to the top, which I'm just about to show you when I'm sewing, we're using that 1.5 centimetre seam allowance that we've got for the bodice. And I decided to do it 1.5 because I thought then that way, when people are altering it, they've got a lot more fabric if they need to let out any of the seams. So once you get to the top where the bust area is, it's going to be a curve shape, so you need to be very careful when you're easing the fabric in because you're sewing 2 curves together. Now we're going to sew the front 3 pieces of the main fabric together and of the lining, and then the back 3 pieces of the main and the lining together. And here I am just sewing the back, so this is the back main because it's got the lacing loops on. We want to keep that separately, don't join any of the side seams just yet. Afterwards, take them all over to the ironing board and press open all of your seams. Now just on the lining pieces of both the front and the back, you're going to turn up the hem of the bodice by 1 centimetre and give that a really good press. You can actually just overlock this. If you want to make it a little bit easier for yourself, you can just run it through the overlock if you've got one. But this will give you a slightly cleaner finish. Now take your main front bodice pieces and place them together right sides facing. And then you're just going to sew down the left side seam of that front piece. So it will end up looking like this. You want to do the opposite with the lining, so sew the right side. Now it's time to move on to making the adjustable straps. So I'm going to take both my strap pieces and my bra strap hardware over to the sewing machine. And I'm going to sew one of my strap pieces first by folding it with the right side inside and stitching down with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. Now we need to turn those strap pieces the right way round, so I'm going to use a loop turner. You don't have to because the strap is quite thick, but I'm just going to show you how to use it here. I'm going to snip a tiny hole at the top or the bottom of the strap on the side that doesn't have the stitching from the seam, and then feed through the loop turner and try and catch that tiny little I don't know what's the word to call it, that tiny little hook, that's what I'm saying, at the bottom of the loop turner, and feed that through. Take your time with these because it can be an absolute nightmare if you get halfway through and then the loop turner falls out. So be really slow when you're pulling this through, and then once you've got the end, you can unhook it and just pull it all the way through. Then we're going to take it over to the iron, and you want to iron it so that that seam is on one side. Now I'm just going to cut off 8 centimetres off both of the straps, and this is going to be for the end of the straps. These go around the small rings. So cut off 8 centimetres and feed that through one of your rings. To secure it at the end, just run a couple of back stitches when you fold over that 8 centimetres, and these are going to go at the very back of the straps. This next part can be quite fiddly, so do really take your time when you're making these. So it's time to attach the slider. So I'm going to feed, this is the end of the strap, just in case you've got a directional pattern like me, so I want my flowers to face upwards. So the end of the strap, I'm going to feed it through the slider, through one end and out of the other, just like this. And then with that end that we've got, I'm going to feed that back through the loop that we've just made, making sure that the fabric falls underneath the loop. Now with that fabric, I'm going to feed that back into the first hole of the slider from the underneath side. This can be really fiddly, so I'm just using the loop turner to try and force that fabric through there. It depends also on how thick your fabric is. So this is 100% cotton, so it is actually quite thick. If you have a thinner fabric, it won't be as difficult. Once that's through, you need to push the other side through the other gap. So again, you might need to use something to push that through. I'm just using the loop turner again. So force that through the other side, and then once you've done that, that fabric should be sandwiched in between the adjustable part of the strap. And you're going to run that under the machine, a few back stitches to secure that, cut off any excess thread, and the first thing you're going to do is test that it works. So then that's when you know you've done it right. Do the exact same thing to the other strap and set them at the same length. Now we need to attach this to the bodice. So this is the front main bodice, and I'm going to pin this strap against the front seam. So this is my centre front bodice and my mid front bodice, that seam that they are connected to. Make sure your strap is also facing the right way, so you want the right side of the strap against the right side of the fabric. And at the back, you're going to pin the back of the strap to that seam where your lacing loops are, so your most back seam. Then afterwards, I'm just going to lift it up because I find it easier just to check that I've done it right. So if you hold it up, you should just check that your straps are all facing the right way, and also have a look to make sure that they're all lay out your main bodice piece. Front and back, they should be connected now. And place on top of that, with the right sides together, your lining. And you're going to pin that all across the top, joining all of those seams together. And while you're joining them, also try and make sure that your straps are downwards, like into the fabric. Just check as you go that you're lining up each of the seams, and I like to put quite a few pins across this just to make sure it doesn't move around. When you're sewing as well, I also find it easier just to lift the fabric from time to time to check that your seams are even and that your straps are down. Sew this together with a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. After you're done, just go back into that centre front and give that a couple of notches, 2 or 3, just to make sure that when you turn it inside out, it's nice and clean. Now, again, this is kind of optional, but I like to do it. I'm going to push all of that seam allowance that we've just sewn to the back lining. So this is with the right side of the fabric facing upwards. So really close to that seam, I'm going to stitch that seam allowance to the back. Now take to the table or a flat surface again your bodice piece, and this time it should be your lining and your main. And at the bottom you should have your main, and to that piece we're going to pin the skirt. So start with the opening that you have on the skirt that we left for the zip and pin that to the hem of the bodice. Pin all the way round, match all the seams and the notches, and then stitch that with the 1.5 cm. Now here comes everyone's least favourite part, which is inserting the invisible zip. So we're going to start off with the right side, the main fabric of the dress bodice, and we're going to pin on the zip, making sure that the teeth are facing inwards. We're going to use our zip foot, so if you've got a domestic machine, it will look a little bit different to this. It's going to look like a foot with 2 squares at the bottom. So you're going to use that to put your zip in. And it's really important that when you come to the seam where the skirt and the bodice join, you push that seam allowance upwards towards the bodice. So stitch down. I actually like to do it twice. So I do it once and then I go back over and get a little bit closer, so that way you don't see the zip as much when it's finished. But if you want to, you can just do it once. And you're going to back stitch and finish that where the second notch on the skirt sits. Cut off any extra threads and then do your zip up just to check that you've done it correctly. Now I have a little hack here to make sure it lines up evenly on the other side. I always like to snip into the zip where the seam of the hip, or it might be the waist on a different dress, lines up on the opposite side of the zip. That way when you come to pin it on the other side, you know it's going to line up. So undo that zip and you spin it in an anti-clockwise direction, so that when you're going to pin the other side, you've got it the right way round. And again, your zip teeth should face inwards. Push that seam from the skirt and the bodice where they're joined upwards again, and use that tiny little notch we made with the scissors to line up. So we know that when we do the dress up, that seam where the skirt and the bodice join is going to be even and on the same line. Then carry on pinning that all the way up and all the way down and sew it in the exact same way, but this time use the other side of your square foot or your other side, or if you have an industrial machine like this one, we're going to use the right foot. And it might feel a bit weird because you'll have all the fabric. Now take your dress onto a flat surface, and this time we're going to fold over the lining. So when it comes to the zip, that extra fabric at the top of the zip, we're going to pin that outwards because we don't want that to show when we turn this the right way around. So firstly pin that outwards and then stretch the lining over the zip, and remember we turned up that hem 1 centimetre, or we overlocked it, whatever you prefer. When you pin that to the seam where the hip and the skirt join, make sure that that is a little bit longer. That way, when it comes to finishing the dress, we're going to encapsulate all of the inside seams so you won't see them. So it's really important that that is longer than your hip seam. So pin that, and I'm just showing you here with my finger where you need to stitch. Stitch close to that edge so we've got that clean finish with the invisible zip on your machine. Then just have a little check once you're done by turning the fabric the right way round, that extra fabric at the top of the zip is hidden, you can't see it, and that you can see all of the zip. Now turn the dress inside out, and we're going to finish that bottom of the circle skirt that we left open. So you're going to take your zip foot again. This is the left zip foot if you're on the industrial machine, or you're going to use the left side if you're using a square foot. And we're going to start with that seam that we started sewing, but we're going to stitch upwards in the gap that we left, and we're going to go past the zip ever so slightly, if you can see with my fingers, and do a couple of back stitches. This is so when we turn the dress inside out, we don't see any of that extra zip. Now still with the inside of the dress, we're going to pin the lining to the skirt, and like we did with the zip, we're going to pin that 1 centimetre we turned up, or the overlocked edge, whatever you did, and we're going to pin that further down than that hip seam, so we hide all of that inside stitching. If you've got an overlocked edge, you need to pin it a little bit further, so pin it about 1 centimetre below. If you've just got the 1 centimetre turn up, just pin it about ½ centimetre below. Then turn your fabric, the right way round, and be careful with the pins because obviously they're on the wrong side, and you're going to stitch in the ditch. So you're going to sew a little bit past the zip, don't get it too close to the zip, in that hole and you're going to catch that 1 centimetre that we turned up. So this is what it should look like from the inside. So it gives you a nice clean finish on the inside. Now you can add your lace in. So if you're going to use ribbon, you're going to cut it 2.4 meters long and singe the ends. But if you want to create it in the same fabric, then you need to cut from your pattern the lacing straps pattern, 2 of them, and join them together at the ends. Then you're going to fold them each to meet in the middle, just like this. Press that with the iron and then fold that over just like this, so that you've only got one side open, and you're going to stitch that side down on the sewing machine as close as you can. Give that a really good press to finish, and then you can either fold the ends or burn them. Let's next make the bow. So take your piece labelled knot over to your sewing machine, fold it right sides together and stitch down one end with 1 centimetre seam allowance. Then you're going to turn it inside out, just like I am here, and then you want that seam to be in the middle. You don't want it to be either side. So once you've got it in the middle, just like this, then you're going to fold it in half and then take that to the machine and stitch with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. Now with the piece that's labelled bow, you're going to fold that in half lengthways so the shorter sides are together, and you're going to stitch down with the 1 centimetre seam allowance. If your pattern's directional like mine is, I've got flowers, then just make sure that your flowers are facing upwards when you're making your bow. Then you're going to fold it in half, and then you want the seam allowance to again be in the middle, and you want to press that seam allowance open. Now at the top, you're going to stitch 1 centimetre from the edge, and then at the bottom you're also going to stitch 1 centimetre in the edge, but you need to leave an opening to turn it inside out. So I suggest leaving maybe 2 or 3 centimetres either side of the seam. Then use that hole we just made to turn the bow inside out. And now you can run a few back stitches across the bottom to close that hole. Now roughly in the middle of the bow, you want to create maybe 3 or 4 pinches, which is going to create the fold in the bow, just like I am here. And then once you've got that midpoint, you're going to run some stitches just to secure that. Now fold your ties in half and use a pin to find the midpoint. So you want to fold them in half and then fold them in half again lengthways, and just pop a pin where you've got the midpoint of the tie, which is going to connect to the bow. And then everywhere else, stitch a 1 centimetre seam allowance, and you're going to leave maybe 2 or 3 centimetres again around the point where the pin is, just as an opening. You're going to miter the corners as well once you've stitched it, which is just cutting them at a 45-degree angle so they turn around really neatly. And then it should look like this. And again, we're going to create a couple of pinches, a couple of folds in the middle, just like we did with the tie, and stitching that down. Now join the bow and the tie together at the midpoint. You kind of want the point of the tie to be facing inwards, by the way. This might be too thick for your machine, so you might need to hand stitch this. And then take that knot piece and you're going to feed one side of the bow and one side of the tie through the knot. So your bow should end up looking something like this. You may just need to run another row of stitches just to make that knot really secure and tight, because it all depends how thick your fabric is. Then I'm going to pin it to my dress and I'm going to use some tacking stitches, probably 5 or 6 over the bow. I'm going to do the top corners, the midpoint of the bow and the knot. I'm going to leave the ties loose. I've hand stitched on a hook and eye just to help with pulling that side zip up on your own, and then this is the finished result. Please share with me at Serino Atelier UK on TikTok and Instagram your makes, and I'll be so grateful if you could leave a review on my Etsy. Thank you for watching.